Welcome to this explainer. Right now, at this exact moment, as you're listening to this, literally trillions of dollars are zipping across the globe. They're settling trades, balancing books, and fueling entire economies. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible story of how one single currency became the absolute, undisputed center of our global financial ecosystem. We're looking at the reign of the greenback and specifically how the US dollar completely rules global finance.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's think about the immense scale for a second. Every single day, over 8 billion people around the world use money. You use it, I use it, local businesses use it. And sure, people buy their daily groceries in dozens of different local currencies, whether that's the euro, the yen, or the peso. But when it comes to the massive structural pillars of our world, when countries trade millions of barrels of oil, or buy enormous quantities of raw materials, or try to store their national wealth, well, they don't use their local money. There is really only one true ruler. One currency dominates all of those massive international transactions, the US dollar.
And honestly, it's a truly fascinating phenomenon. Why does a local business in Southeast Asia or a central bank in South America deeply care about a piece of paper printed in Washington, D.C.? The dollar is so incredibly powerful that countries thousands and thousands of miles away from the United States depend entirely on it for their daily economic survival. So how exactly did a currency created by one single nation become the undisputed money of the entire world? To solve this mystery and figure out how the globe became so deeply tied to the dollar network, we need to rewind the clock.
All right, Chapter 1, The Rise to Power.
Let's dive right into this historical journey. Because for centuries, currencies have basically just followed the dominant trading and naval empires of their time. If we look way back at the 1600s, the Spanish Empire dominated the globe using their vast reserves of silver to facilitate international trade. Fast forward a bit to the early 1900s, and the British Empire had established itself as the world's leading economic power. During that era, the British pound was the currency that ruled international trade. But, as history shows us, that supreme reign was bound to end. The First World War severely drained the British Empire's wealth, setting the absolute perfect stage for the pound's decline and a massive, unprecedented shift in global financial leadership. And then came the Second World War. This conflict fundamentally altered the entire global landscape. Following those devastating years, Europe's cities were completely destroyed and entire economies had collapsed. But the United States, well, America emerged entirely different. The U.S. had spent years supplying the Allied war effort with weapons, food, and crucial supplies, and through programs like Lend-Lease and direct sales, the U.S. demanded payment in gold. Because of this, American factories were absolutely booming, and by 1945, the United States was holding nearly two-thirds of the world's entire monetary gold reserves. The U.S. was now undeniably the strongest economic and industrial power on Earth.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, The Bretton Woods Agreement.
So, that massive shift in economic power led world leaders to a small town in New Hampshire in 1944. Their goal? To build a stable global financial system out of the ashes of war. The solution they came up with at Bretton Woods was elegant but deeply profound. They decided to tie the world's currencies directly to the US dollar, and in turn, tie the US dollar directly to gold. By crowning the dollar as the world's reserve currency, banks and nations everywhere finally had a system they could completely trust. But actually, here is the critical historical twist. In 1971, during what became known as the Nixon shock, the U.S. permanently severed the dollar's tie to gold. Yet, amazingly, the world was already so deeply hooked on the dollar network that instead of collapsing, it just remained the undisputed reserve currency anyway.
Moving on to Chapter 3, The World's Currency.
Now, what's wild is that historical momentum from the mid-20th century absolutely still dominates the physical goods moving around our planet right now. The most vital global commodities, we're talking things like oil, natural gas, gold, and the international shipping lines that move everything. They are traded almost exclusively in dollars. And a massive reason for this goes back to the 1970s. The U.S. made a strategic agreement with Saudi Arabia to price oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. This created the petrodollar. It essentially meant that virtually every country in the world needed a constant supply of dollars just to buy the energy to keep their lights on, locking the greenback into the global system permanently.
Think about this fascinating scenario for a second. Imagine Japan needs to buy oil to power its cities, and they're buying that oil from Saudi Arabia. Neither country is the United States, right? Neither country uses the dollar as their everyday domestic money. Yet, when these two completely different countries trade with each other, the transaction is settled in US dollars. Why? Well, it all comes down to liquidity and trust. It is simply easier infinitely cheaper and much safer for both nations to exchange their local money into dollars rather than trying to find a direct, stable exchange rate between the Japanese yen and the Saudi rial. The dollar basically acts as the ultimate universal translator for global commerce.
Let's look at Chapter 4, America's Secret Advantage.
Because let's be real, being the currency of the world isn't just a fancy title, it comes with profound, tangible perks. Because the entire world absolutely demands dollars to function, the U.S. gains what a French finance minister in the 1960s famously called an exorbitant privilege. Since foreign nations always need dollars for trade, they take their excess cash and buy U.S. debt, specifically Treasury bonds, to store it safely. This means the U.S. government can run massive deficits and borrow money way more easily than any other nation. Plus, American businesses can trade globally with significantly less risk because they never have to worry about losing money in currency exchange rates. They're already holding the money the rest of the world wants.
The dollar has become a global safe haven. It's like the world's financial emergency shelter. This dynamic creates an incredibly powerful paradox. Whenever the world faces extreme uncertainty, people panic. But where do they run? During the 2008 financial crash, or the sudden global lockdowns in 2020, investors didn't flee the dollar. No, they aggressively hoarded it. They immediately rushed to protect their wealth by pouring it into dollar-based assets. It's kind of crazy, but even when the United States is the direct epicenter of a financial crisis, the rest of the world still runs to the US dollar for safety. It truly is the ultimate shelter from the economic storm.
Which leads us to Chapter 5, Will the Dollar Fall?
History shows us that economic power always shifts eventually, but replacing the reigning champion, that is incredibly difficult. For a new currency to actually take the throne, it has to hit some major milestones. It must establish unshakable trust, be backed by exceptionally strong institutions, develop deep, highly liquid financial markets, and achieve universal global acceptance. And when we look at modern rivals, you can see exactly why they fail these tests. The euro is held back because Europe lacks a unified fiscal institution to manage its debt. The Chinese renminbi struggles because China lacks open, transparent capital markets that foreign investors fully trust. And cryptocurrencies? Well, while innovative, they currently lack the universal stability and deep institutional trust required to run the real global economy.
So, the US dollar rules the world thanks to this totally unique blend of history, immense liquidity, unyielding economic strength, and the sheer momentum of global trade. I mean, it survived world wars, abandoned the gold standard, and became the very center of international finance anyway. Given the sheer amount of global debt and trade permanently tied to the greenback, dethroning it would require nothing short of a massive financial earthquake. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider about the future of our global economy. Will the dollar remain king for the next 50 years, or are we quietly standing on the edge of a completely new financial era?